First of
Yeah.
all, I'm here in Axios headquarters in Clarendon, Virginia, in my hometown of Northern Virginia. So I'm happy to be talking to Jim VandeHei and Mike Allen, two men people I admire greatly. We're talking about Jim's book, but I thought we first start by talking about you two
Oh, boy.
and your bromance.
Our bromance.
How did it begin, fellas? I mean, you guys have known each other for a long time. Did he have you at hello, Jim?
He had me at first speed. So we were on the Lido deck. So you'll recall. So back in the 2000s, there was all those trade protests whenever we would travel with the president.
Right.
And there was one in Genoa, Italy, and they had to lock down the city, and they had nowhere to put reporters. And so they brought in this creaky, clunky old cruise ship that they put us in on. And it was about 4 o'clock in the morning, and I had to write. I was working for the Journal, so I had to write for the Asian Wall Street Journal, Europe Wall Street Journal. And Mike was down there, had already filed, and I walked by him, and he had a bunch of beers laid out, and he looked at me and he said, "For speed?" To see who could slam a beer faster. Like any good Wisconsin boy, I said yes, and then lost, unfortunately.
And do you remember it that way too, Mike?
I remember winning, absolutely.
But you all, how did this great partnership begin? I mean, you both are superb journalists. I was going to say I've seen your bylines for years and always admired your work. How did you two get together and say, let's put on a show?
You know, like you, we were journalists, right? We didn't think we were going to become entrepreneurs. And we had this idea to start Politico when I was at the Washington Post. He had been at the Post, but went to Time Magazine. Once we had this idea, like, hey, we could take on the Post if we had the best and brightest reporters. Like Mike's at the top of that list. And so he was very much part of those conversations. The more we thought about starting Politico back in 06, 07, the more magical it felt, and it kind of took on a life of its own. And Mike was the first hire, and it was kind of off to the races from there. And we were friendly. I don't know that we were, like, obviously we're like talk 1,000 times a day now, but back then, like, it was sort of a building a friendship. And then once you go through starting a company, particularly what people don't remember, back when we started Politico, everyone wanted us to fail. Part of it was that there's probably too much
Expected us to, wanted us to.
Yes, and so you really bonded over, like, everyone's rooting for your failure. You're trying to take on the Post. I was probably popping off too much publicly, making other people even root louder for our demise. And you bond in a way that it's hard to explain to someone who hasn't started up a company, because it's almost like, you know, it's like you're in this foxhole together, and like you see things about people's character that you wouldn't otherwise see, and you really get to know who's the real deal.
Go ahead, Mike. Did you realize at the time that the media landscape was ripe for disruption? I mean, you actually were very prescient, because it was before iPhones became ubiquitous and they were replacing people's TV screens, and in many ways, newspapers and people were getting information digitally, magazines were folding, yada, yada, yada. I mean, did you think about that as you started Politico?
Yeah, and that's something that has totally changed. So now everybody realizes the world is changing. Then
or has changed.
Right. And this was 2006, 2007. The world was changing, and the big media companies had no idea. They were being warned and told, and you were inside them. Like, you're one of the most famous
frustrated.
People ever to be on TV. You were at the big three networks, the very definition of legacy media. Jim had been at the Wall Street Journal, then Washington Post. I've been at the Washington Post and then Time Magazine. So the most traditional of paths. But we could see that the world was about to change how people consume, how people deliver news. And here's the warning for your listeners, and I love that you've become a fellow builder, a fellow entrepreneur, a very successful one. By the way, was that the tools were there. The internet had been invented, and yet at the networks where you worked, at the Washington Post, at Time Magazine, everybody covered the news as if it were coming on at 7 a.m. or 6:30 p.m. or the paper was going to be in your driveway. And so there was a huge opening for Politico to come in with more expertise, more speed, more voice, more passion. There was an underserved audience, and we barreled it.
there's so many things I want to talk to you all about. But one thing that comes up when you make those comments, Mike, is legacy media took so long to wake up and smell the coffee and to see that we were undergoing a major transformation in media. And I'm curious, I have a lot of theories about why. I'm curious what your theories are. Why were they so slow?
I don't think it's just media. I think big institutions become complacent. You delude yourself into thinking you need to protect the place where you're currently getting the most money, right? You used to have,
they didn't want to cannibalize what they were doing,
Circuit
right?
City, Blockbuster, right? There's like a lot of stories of companies that had made Kodak could have made the pivot, saw the pivot coming, didn't make it. And it's just hard to take a big institution with thousands of people.
It's like turning around a cruise ship, isn't it, Jim?
Yes, and it's like, and people are just, it wasn't built that way. It was built for size and durability. It wasn't built for agility.
And
that's
predictability, right?
And predictability. And so we had such an advantage jumping in and saying, you know what, we're just going to listen to what the consumer's saying now. We're going to adapt to it. We'll keep changing if the consumer's changing, and we'll stop. We didn't have a legacy, so we didn't have to stop doing bad things. We could just do good things and do things that we know drive value. And I think that transcends media. I think it's I think it's hard for people to realize. I think one of the reasons that people have so much anxiety is that starting in 2007, once you have the phone and once the internet has connectivity to enough people, basically the world started changing at a pace that our brains can't keep up with. And I think that causes a natural anxiety. It also changes business cycles and budgeting, meaning every business changes in a month what it might have changed in years.
Right.
And so it just requires a level of adaptability and agility that if you don't have, you're ultimately going to get left behind. And that's why you're probably having more fun with a startup company doing what you want to do as you're watching it explode as you would have in the heyday of being the most powerful anchor in the history of television. It's just they're two different things built for different eras.
Well, even in 2011, you guys, when I did a syndicated talk show, I felt like I was riding on the back of a dinosaur.
Yeah.
I mean, you could sense that the world was changing, and yet you were clinging to this old way of doing things. And for somebody who wants to be an early adapter and wants to be where the puck is going, it was very frustrating for me.
Well, the key thing is what Jim said about knowing what the consumer is going and what the consumer wants. So the first two words of the Axios manifesto are mission statement: audience first. And when we started, we were reader first, and then we got video and podcast and events. So now we're audience first. But a media company had never been designed that way. Media companies had always been designed for the ego of journalists like you and me who want airtime or who want column feet, thousands of words on the page. Or it was designed for the needs of the business side, the publisher. Oh,
right.
We're going to make you spend time on site, even though you have no time, right? Like I'm going to clutter up your page with a bunch of videos that you're not going to watch.
Well, we're going to give you clickbait, and we're going to piss you off
Right.
so you read what we're talking about, right?
Right, like all serving either the journalist or the publisher. We flipped
Or
that.
the bottom line, yeah.
Right. We flipped, but no, this is key for Axios. Axios flipped that. Axios, by the way, means worthy. In Greek, always worthy of your time. We never waste your time. We never insult your intelligence. We took that and we flipped it and we said, okay, if we were a consumer, what would we want? What do we want as readers? And that was the light bulb moment for smart brevity. We realized that what you want is the big idea said clearly on a very elegant, clear iPhone screen. We'll tell you what's new, why it matters, give you the power to go deeper, and the audience loved it. And thanks to our co-founder, Roy Schwartz, it's also a beautiful business.
Although it's not profitable.
Right. Well, it depends how you look.
I mean, that's what I know that you have said
well,
that
well,
because you were
your core
investing.
business. Yeah.
So you are diversifying your portfolio,
Yeah.
and as a result of that, you are putting money into exploring other
For sure.
avenues.
Yeah.
So talk about that, because I think that's another thing that is really sometimes puts a strain on a business. Like, it's profitable, when are you going to give back to your investors and all that?
I mean, one, it depends on what your investment structure is and kind of what you're trying to do, right? You could run a very nice boutique media company, have profitability and not do the things that come with scale. Like for us, there's an ambition to it, right? Like we're animated by this idea that if you get more good information in the hands of more people, they're going to make better decisions and the country benefits. Like it really is what animates us.
And you feel like journalism is a public service.
Public service, a professional service. Like I don't understand how people can operate in this world when everything's changing so fast if they're not better educated on what's real and what's not real in AI and in information
Yeah, we're going to talk about that in a
China,
moment.
all of that. And so that very much is what animates us. So then when we think about that, one, you want to invest in things that it's fine to be in deficit if you're investing in things that you're highly confident are going to be very profitable over time and give you different revenue streams. And then for us, a big part of our investment is local, which is a real experiment, probably the hardest thing we've ever taken on.
But so critically important because if people are engaged in local news, they're more likely to vote. They're more likely be interested in national elections. And I think 2,400 newspapers have folded since 2004. I mean, it's a crisis, really, in a democracy.
Yeah, we tell our staff all the time, we're in 30 cities, if we can get local right, where we could get to 100 or plus cities where it's profitable in every city, that will be a bigger achievement than doing Axios and Politico combined. Because it's that hard. Nobody in the digital era has shown any success rate in doing local at scale. You have a couple of one-off projects in a couple of cities. And so like that's a fun thing, but we're not just doing it as a public service, even though there's a public service dimension to it. We're doing it because we actually think it'll be a really good business, that over time, if we can get smart professionals at local high-end niches and then national news to be reading us, we know how to monetize that through events, paid subscriptions, advertising, sort of the things you could do to make money off of media. And so we feel blessed that like we're one of the companies that can continue to invest in that. And as you know, like media, it is hard. I'd argue it's one of the hardest businesses to do at any kind of size profitably. The flip of that is we get to have more fun, we get to get paid to be intellectually curious, and if we nail it, we get to make people smarter so they make better decisions.
And
P.S.
society you get
benefits.
to make a shit ton of money, Jim.
Well, if you're selling a company, sure.
Good for you guys, but I mean, it's worked out very, very well.
And
For
you
sure.
can delight the audience, which is a great twist that in all the years we've been.
I think your card should say Mike Allen, delighter of audiences.
I'm in. As long as I'm delighting Casey, I'm good. But we've had people since day one. People thank us for Axios, and working in legacy media, people rarely thanked you for NBC News.
Well, legacy media has, it is such a tough landscape now as we've seen this digital shift. And I'm curious what you all think will happen to these legacy media companies, say even 5 years from now, because we've seen them now playing catch up, trying to really basically put the analog product on a digital platform. But that doesn't really work, does it? I mean, how do you see things shaking out in the next 5 years? Because I have young people saying to me, I want to get into media, and I try to encourage them because I feel like our jobs are critically important, and yet I sometimes struggle in terms of giving them advice.
It's certainly getting harder to encourage someone to go into media just because the economics are hard. But what I tell those people is like, listen, if you are smart, you're curious, you want to help people get smarter on topics that matter, there are jobs. There really are. It might be different. You might not be working for a big TV company. You might be working on TikTok or Instagram. You might be working for a smaller niche brand. You might be working for an Axios. Like, we're not the size of the New York Times. We're not the size of NBC. And so I think there are opportunities. I think the big institutions, listen, I think there's some newspapers that are household names that are going to be fine. The New York Times has a wonderful business model.
Washington Post is struggling, though.
Washington Post is struggling, but the Journal, I think, is doing okay and good. Bloomberg is fine. FT is good. There's a decent number of papers I think will be fine. TV, as you know, is a lot harder. Like the consumer is just consuming content differently. The young people are they're basically habituated to getting it in smaller chunks on social media, in a feed, in a voice that matches their passions, their locations, their demographics. That's not going to change. And so somehow these TV companies are going to have to figure out how the hell do we integrate into that? There's even an opportunity for us to integrate into that. So I think big TV is in probably a lot more trouble than big newspapers, just because that's a harder shift to make. And they operate at a cost scale that's really, really high. Whereas you could see AI being very helpful to your company and to our company in terms of it cuts down on the cost of distribution. There's a lot of not journalism stuff that gets done that you could see AI being very helpful in, that might allow companies like yours, companies like ours, to be able to put more effort and more money and more mind share into the journalism itself. And so there's going to be a real benefit to not being big and lumbering, I think, over the next couple of years.
Right. Being nimble, I think, is going to be the key. Before we talk about AI, because I'm fascinated with that, I want to talk about mass media, because I've said for years now in graduation speeches and whenever I can, just because I think it makes me sound smart, that mass media is now an oxymoron, right? There is no such thing as mass. And I'm curious about your approach with Axios and initially Politico. I mean, you had a very, I won't say narrow target market, but you were not trying to serve the world.
Right.
Talk to me about that, because sometimes I'm a generalist, right? I care about all kinds of news and information. I'm interested in so many things. And for our readers and people who follow me on social media, who I hope to serve and educate and enlighten, I kind of am all over the place.
Yep.
Is that a bad business model in this day and age, you guys? I'm actually using this to get business advice from you guys.
I don't, again, like based on what you've told me, it sounds like it's a good business model, but it's about you knowing your reader. It sounds like you do. You know your reader, you know your listener, you know your watcher. You're constantly in conversation with them, and as long as you're serving them and then you're able to make more money than you're spending, like it's by definition a really good business. What is true is when we looked at it differently, right? Our specialty, if you really boil it down, is understanding how the most influential, hard-to-reach people consume information. People in the White House, running companies, running tech companies, running media companies. And so when we never went mass. We went the opposite. We called it radiate out. Go for the bullseye. Get the Speaker of the House, get the President, get Jamie Dimon, get those people reading.
You had a picture of Nancy Pelosi as your target market,
and
right?
And then little by little, you would echo out because people would want to know what they're thinking, what they're doing. And by the way, if a reporter can
and what
tell,
they're reading, right?
And what they're reading. And if the reporter can tell them something they don't know, that means they're a really, really good reporter. And so that has worked. Now I would say we are more of a mass company and that there's a much bigger audience. But where you're super right on there's no more mass media, we did a column not long ago called Shards of Glass.
I read it, and you didn't include us, and it hurt my feelings, and I emailed you, and you ghosted me.
I know I didn't. I didn't know I got an email until Mikey told me you're really mad at me and that you thought I ghosted you. I did not ghost you.
I wasn't really
but it's
mad.
A fair point that you could
There's a makeup call coming.
I was more hurt than mad. Go on.
Apologies for
Thank
that.
you.
There were several people who said the same. You can't list everybody,
Yeah,
all great
that's
media
true.
companies. But the idea there was like, you think about you in your heyday and us in our heyday, so pre-digital. We all looked at the world through kind of the same window, right? It was what was happening with the big networks, what was happening with a few newspapers, relatively shared reality on who we're dealing with and who we're listening to. Digital shatters that into, you could argue, 30, 40, 50 pieces where...
Millions, actually.
And it's crazy because you could be sitting at a table and every person could be consuming information in a different shard of glass, listening to people, following people, getting worked up about topics that you wouldn't even know who that person is. You wouldn't even know what that type of, what? You're worried about that topic? You're getting your information how? And that's really hard. So then it makes it really hard to have a common truth.
Yes.
It's really easy for manipulated, fake, or just kind of spun content to take off. And then I find it, and I'm sure you find it, so you do with your newsletter, a lot of it, you said you see the world, part of it is news, part of it's aggregation, right? I don't know about you, but like many days I wake up and I'm like, wait, is that real? Is that not real? The number of times we're having, is this real? Did he really say that? Like that, and we're paid to be able to filter that. geez, a poor reader on the other side trying to figure out, like, someone's hyperventilating on Fox News or on Twitter or on
I
TikTok.
know. Same with
Hard.
me, and it's actually very time consuming because now I have to take additional steps to verify what I'm reading. I have to look it up. I have to Google it. I have to compare it to other publications. It's really hard to be a news consumer today.
All true, but the flip of that is that being Katie Couric Media or being Axios, being a brand that people know and trust, then becomes even more valuable. Because if I know that I'm on Axios, I know that this is going to be both literally accurate and broadly true. We talk about our journalism. Trustworthy is the number one word. Absolutely the most important thing. And it gets more important as the web gets more polluted. That there's more fake content, more synthetic content, more misinfo, more disinfo. Then you want to go to people you know and trust.
Yes, but it's really hard because, to Jim's point, people are creating their own ecosystems and echo chambers, and
With very
it is
little
increasing-
overlap is a huge
right,
change.
and
Yeah.
creating and disinformation, misinformation, malinformation. They're creating their own bubbles, and it is really hard to have a conversation. And I'm curious how you all have straddled this desire to be old school and objective and search for truth when you have a political movement in this country that seems to not necessarily appreciate the truth, right? If you think about the rigged election and some of the other things that are happening and people seeing things through uniquely different prisms, how do you do that and still remain trusted if in fact you are sharing factual information? That is a real challenge.
Epic challenge, and almost, to be honest, almost an impossible challenge. I mean, the way we do it is we try to say, listen, like, we're going to cover everything clinically, meaning we don't have an opinion page. We're not here to put our thumb on the scale, but we're also not here to deceive people into thinking that everything is equal on both sides. We do that by hiring people who are authentically wired into these campaigns and can at least help explain these people, explain their ideas.
So you're not
to readers.
judging, you're explaining.
And clinically, like a doctor would. Like a doctor, you might have cancer, and the doctor might be telling you it's cancer, but he's not doing it emotionally. He's trying to walk you through what are the things that we know, what are the things that can be done. And I think at our best, we do that. It's hard because anything that you say, anything that you write, a snippet of it gets taken out of context and thrown on social media, and suddenly you're a Biden hack or a Trump
Honestly,
hack.
that happened to me recently. I was doing Bill Maher, and I was trying to explain income inequality and class resentment feeding into anger, grievance, and I said as an aside to Bill, feeling jealous and envious is a horrible feeling. And I said that's created a lot of anti-elitism and anti-intellectualism, a doubt in science and academia, et cetera. P.S., not an original thought.
Right.
Fox News and all these right-wing radio stations twisted it, cherry-picked it, and said I said all Trump voters are jealous and anti-intellectual.
Right. Yeah. And there's nothing you can really do. You could try to correct the record, but by then,
but
it's
nobody
cemented.
took the time to actually listen to the whole statement. They plucked two words. It's engagement through enragement, as my friend Kara Swisher describes it, clickbait, and suddenly I am demonized in the minds of all Trump voters. Having said that, I do wonder how people can support a candidate who has perpetuated this notion of a rigged election when how many 62 lawsuits or something have been thrown out. So I have a hard time trying to navigate this, and I do look to you all and notice how you cover things, but as a person, it's really hard.
I think part of
as
it,
journalists.
it is really hard. Like no one has sympathy for folks in the press. It's really, really hard. There's not this idea from like the media critics on Twitter who think there's just a simple solution. Just call a lie a lie. Like, great. Like, you're an academic. You're not
Or
in the
Biden can
trenches.
fix immigration with the stroke of a pen.
Right.
It's not true.
It's not true. What you can do is like try to explain what's actually happening.
It requires
what's
an
doing.
act of Congress, to
Yes.
allocate more funds, right? I mean,
or put the emphasis, like one thing we've tried to do, and I think the Times has done a nice job of, is explaining in detail that Trump is always going to be Trump. You're not going to change him. He's going to say outlandish things every day. The thing you should be paying attention to is what's happening around Trump, which is you have a lot more smart people who are very organized, who are helping him prepare, if he does come into government, to be able to operate government a lot more effectively than it did last time. So if you like him, that's good. If you don't like him, he's going to be able to stretch the boundaries in a much more
Well,
elastic way.
what about this Project 2025?
It's a real thing.
I
and
mean,
it's
it's really scary. Will you explain to the people listening what that is? Mike, you want to?
Yeah. So this is the most advanced effort to prepare for an administration that there's been in history. And it started even before Trump had clinched the Republican nomination. So for years now, this project's been underway. So the project you mentioned, Project 2025, part of the Heritage Foundation, like a very well-funded project. And they are pre-vetting thousands of people that could come in to a Trump administration, who could go in as top appointees, top nominees. And so they're building this massive resume database on this side. And then on the other side, they and others are developing extremely detailed policy for what he did, because this is what Jim said. The chaos of last time, they recognized that last time
They need more discipline.
right, and they knew that like they couldn't get Republicans to agree, they couldn't get the administration to agree. This time it's going to be much more organized, and it's going to be move fast. They recognize how fast they're going to have to move, and one of the biggest things that they've said, and Axios has led on this, and the New York Times has done great reporting on this, is the effort to turn over the bureaucracy, to push out so many people who in the past administrations have just accepted that's what's going to be there. They're going to turn that over. They're going to move fast on the border. They have, and at the Justice Department, the way it's been said to me is whatever you think is the most aggressive possible approach you can take on immigration, his appointee is going to be even more aggressive and purposeful.
But is there cause for concern with this whole plan? I mean, it's not just an ideology, isn't it? Sort of fealty at all costs. And how are they looking for people who will fill these important roles?
Total fealty. It's all. I mean, they're very clear. It's a loyalty test. Like it is about like, what do you think about Donald Trump? And if you can't pass that, you're not going to get into the government. And it's a big deal because we're not talking a couple hundred people. We're talking it could be tens of thousands of people. And the way government operates is you have these obscure agencies that are by design boring and should be boring, and they're staffed by career civil servants, people who have domain expertise.
And a rich knowledge base.
Rich knowledge base. So if you replace that with people who are just purely ideological, then you can start to stretch the boundaries of what can you do through administrative action, which doesn't require Congress. You can also stretch, and they're going to do it. They're going to try to figure out, let's do things that might not be ultimately legal, but let's have the courts render a verdict while we do it. So even the firing of 40,000 people, like, there's a real legal case, like, can it be done, can it not be done? They'll do it, and then they'll just go to the courts and hope that they win it. And what it'll do is it'll just step way back. The thing that I worry most about the country is we basically are now on this 20-year path where we've basically lost faith in every institution, media, government, church, Boy Scouts, politicians, you name it. And so whenever you have people in a public setting who are continuing to be exceptionally derogatory about government, making everyone think that everyone's on the take, making everyone think that everyone's incompetent, then you don't get the really smart people who might want to come to work to government to make government work. And so you end up with not anarchy, but you basically end up with a bunch of people who just feel like they can't trust anything, and you end up with nothing that unifies all of us. And we've gone through periods like this in history, but they're dangerous periods because at the end of the day, there are things where we have to be united to be able to do it, and where you do need a functioning government. With AI, man, it's going to be a big deal. I wish I had smart people in government who are working on that and thinking about that and making sure that we win this AI war and China doesn't, and that we do it responsibly and it doesn't lead to mass unemployment for a big sector of people who just finally are rebounding from the manufacturing crisis that really hit them hardest.
Right. Well, how do you report on this without saying, holy shit? This is scary stuff. You know, in other words, you guys say that you tell people what's happening clinically, but do you feel any obligation as an American citizen to say, this is potentially really damaging for our country? You know, because you don't have opinion. So I'm just curious, like, how you draw that line, because it's hard sometimes for me not to sound the alarms.
Well, and you can say to people, pay attention to this, and like, we're going to give you the very best information about this, and like, we spent a lifetime like building connections to all the communities that are involved so that we can like connect them and bring it to you. And people appreciate that because there's so much noise that people tend to tune out everything. And so if we can say to you, this is what matters, pay attention to this, watch this, then that becomes incredibly valuable.
Because you feel as if you come at it from too much bias or even colored with too much editorial focus, that people will dismiss it.
They will. Listen, I believe there's still a big group of people out there who are persuadable to the truth. They're not persuadable if you come at it with a condescending tone. They're not persuadable if you come at it hyperventilating. And they're not persuadable if you're not coming at it looking at like the operations of everybody. Yes, Joe Biden is not Donald Trump, but Joe Biden's not a saint, and Donald Trump's not in every single action a sinner. And you have to be able to explain to people with fact, just like what's happening. I just got back I did a bunch of speaking, like you probably do, right? So I did a bunch of different groups, but it was in like normal America, so like Wichita, Fargo. The audiences were overwhelmingly Trump supporters. You know, going in there, like, oh, here's this guy from the media, man, this like communist is about to lecture us. And what I find is like, if you could just diffuse it and say, listen, I'm not here to lecture you or tell you what's right or wrong. I know Donald Trump. I know Joe Biden. I know a lot of people in Washington. We've covered this stuff for 20 years. I'm here to explain to you how they think and the actions that they're going to take, and then you decide what you're going to do with that. And you could see the blood just start to come down, and you could have like a conversation. And in the Q&A, it wasn't people throwing shoes at me. It was people asking very thoughtful questions. And you can't just assume, because Trump is so damn outrageous and often so dishonest, that everybody who's voting for him likes his dishonesty. They don't. To them, they're like, I got two choices, and man, I don't like that guy. I don't like that guy. I'm gonna go with that one. That's what most of voting.
Jim just held his nose.
Well, you'll do subtitles. Voice of God.
I'm curious. I mean, again, I've got to figure out, because I don't want this podcast to be 3 hours, but I could talk to you guys for 3 hours covering the campaign. Have journalists learned anything? I still see them referring to poll after poll after poll, despite the fact in 2020 the polls were wrong. When are they going to stop doing that? And how can we convince them? If you had a magic wand, how would you have journalists cover this election?
Well, you're never going to convince them or they, right, to do it, right? Like you can do a great job at your media company. Like we can do a great job at our media company, telling people what to pay attention to. And for your listeners, what do you pay attention to? Like there's 6 states that are going to matter. You start in Arizona, Nevada, up to Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Georgia. Like those are the states that are going to determine the presidency. Any poll that looks at the whole country is, of course, just popularity and is not going to determine the outcome. Like what's going to matter is, like Jim was talking about, people are persuadable, like the small segment of people in each of those states who are going to matter. And I can tell you that Democrats, looking at the polls at the moment, like they're very concerned about those 6 states. And a lot of them, like Trump has been winning here and there. Biden will win Michigan or Wisconsin. Those seem to be his best states. But they're very concerned about what's going to happen in those 6 states. And so that's what matters. Look at that. Look at where the candidates are spending money. You talk about like what have we learned? Like one of the biggest things with Trump, like he's Trump. Like you're not going to be able to anticipate it. He's going to say what's on his mind, but you can look at what he's going to do, who he's surrounding himself with, like what they've promised to do, like what they've been doing in the 4 years while they've been out. Those are all real things that put together can help listeners, viewers, readers, like understand what's coming out.
Well, how do you have people who represent Trump supporters say on television, or, how do you channel their feelings, grievances, whatever, or wishes in a way that is not validating some of the untruths that are perpetuated by the Trump campaign? They had that problem at NBC. I'm curious how you all feel about that with Ronna McDaniel, right, the former head of the RNC. And there was outrage on behalf of all these journalists at MSNBC. They said, how could you hire this person? She perpetuated lies, about the rigged election and said January 6th was no big deal. I can't remember her exact words, but and how do you give voice to many millions of people in the country who feel this way without saying it's okay to say the election was rigged when it wasn't?
Right.
I mean, it's like, what?
Right.
One way is looking at the reality versus the rhetoric, right? Like looking at what's changing in people's lives. What are they confronting? What do they think about opportunity for their kids? Like all that is informing this view that even though there's a lot of very positive macro signs in the economy, people clearly aren't feeling it.
Right. Well, look at inflation. They're looking at food prices and gas prices and how much it costs to feed a family, right? I mean...
Right. And so that you have Republicans now kind of boiling their campaign down to they're calling it prices and the border instead of saying inflation and immigration. Prices and the border. And because they feel like those are things that hit home, they're going to try and talk about those, like not some of the other issues that are going to be turning out Democratic voters, including choice.
We also have the choice to not give oxygen to it. Like, it just doesn't, like going back to those speeches, when someone asks that question, I'm like, I'm sorry. Like, I've been reporting for 20 years and I've been looking at allegations of voter fraud, and I have never found convincing evidence that it had a decisive effect in any state, in any election, including the last election. And by the way, guess who else came to that conclusion? The people running the election system in those states who happen to be Republicans. So it's just don't give it oxygen. It's just not true. Just like there's no debate about January 6th.
What did the audience do when you said that?
There wasn't a vicious response to it. I'm not saying you're a stupid idiot for thinking that way. I'm just saying it's just not
Here's
so.
the
Just
reality.
like
Yeah.
And just like January 6th, like it happened. There's not a debate. People died. It's not normal for the Capitol, the seat of democracy in the most powerful nation in the history of the world, to be ransacked by people, where people die and people defecate in the chamber that is like the seat of our freedom. Like, I'm sorry, there's just not a debate there. Like, we don't even really cover it because it's so ludicrous and so untrue that we don't have to give oxygen to it every time. Now, TV, it's a little harder because you're trying to take things live, and Trump goes off has like these 20 greatest hits in his head, and you never know what track he's going to play, and he plays it, and you're like, whoa, did we cut away? Like, I mean, I don't envy TV. TV is a harder world, and we don't have an opinion page, so I don't have to make a determination about whether we have a former RNC chairperson who, to be honest, isn't close to Trump and doesn't really understand Trump theology to begin with, so I wouldn't find that super useful on my opinion page, but NBC decided it was. Like, I don't know.
Let's talk about AI. It's interesting because you said something fairly positive about AI just a few minutes ago, Jim,
Yeah.
and yet at the same time, I know that you have pledged to your readers that everything you write is going to be written by an actual human being.
Yeah.
Katie is touching Mike right now. So tell me how you view AI and how it is going to even further transform the media landscape.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to do that succinctly. So
Yeah,
basically,
sorry.
you have a technology that's probably going to be as profound as the invention of the internet or us having phones at scale and connectivity. And so we know it's going to be big. So what we do is we're trying to figure out, well, what does that mean for media? What does that mean for information consumption? And our belief is it's going to be profound. It's just going to radically change the relationship between you, the reader or the consumer, and the content that you're getting. And we want to make sure we're at least one step ahead of it. And what we believe are the known knowns that affect your company and affect our company is that people are going to increasingly value expertise. Oh, that person knows something that no machine could ever know. They have sourcing that no machine could ever have. They have history with a topic that it gives them analytical insight that no machine's ever going to have. That's one. Two, you're going to want trust. There's going to be so much garbage out there. You're going to want a relationship between you, the consumer, and the media company that is built totally on trust. Three is a place where we're doing a lot of investment, and there's probably stuff we could do together on that, is in-person connectivity. The more you live in an artificial world, in a virtual world, the more you consciously and subconsciously crave human interaction around shared passions, particularly professionally. And so we do a lot of events, 100 plus every year, but we're also doing membership programs where we bring people who might have a passion around, say, the communications industry to be able to, get smarter on their topics, maybe gather together to share best practices, and we think there's a really rich business there. So I think if you can do those things, you'll be fine. Now, there's a flip of that, which is there's probably technologies that are going to be AI-powered that are going to make our lives easier. Building technology, distributing content, copy editing, creation of data visualization. You can see very clearly how all of those are going to be done quite well by machines. And so you just want to anticipate that those things are going to happen and be clear-eyed. Like all these people are like not paying attention to AI. Like, I don't get it. It's like someone told you, imagine going back in time and someone told you 2 years ahead of time, hey, the internet's coming. And you knew that, and it was certain it was coming.
The App Store.
Right.
Yeah.
Like, it's coming. Like these big companies are spending trillions of dollars. They will it into existence. Will it be smarter than us? Will we be working for it? I hope not. I could definitely give you dark scenarios in almost every use case of AI. I could also give you very positive use cases. And either way, I think it requires us to be clear-eyed. And this is where I think journalism really, really matters. We have to educate people on these technologies, on the companies that benefit, on what will happen between nation-state rivalries, what happens when warfare moves to drones and moves to satellites and moves to space, and the oceans that we have on our shoulders no longer protect us the way they did in the past. We have an obligation to tell that story and, like you said, kind of grab people by the collar. Say, this is really, really, really important.
And it's coming, and you can't stop it.
Well, you get the same notes you probably get from readers, like, man, you're scaring me. Quit writing about AI. I'm like, sorry. like it's the thing, and we're going to keep doing it because you need to pay attention to it so you can be smarter about it. It doesn't mean you need to go work for Google. It doesn't even mean that you need to be using, like, your own co-pilot right now.
Why don't we all do a documentary about it?
I know. It's going to be...
To really just, like, explain it. How the history of AI and
Yeah.
what it's going to do. I think we could, because there are so many exciting applications, like in medical research, in terms of detection of all kinds of diseases. I mean, this massive database is just going to be remarkable. I'm really excited about that.
Yeah.
But I feel like nobody's really taken this massive topic and really help people understand it. So we'll discuss that later.
And you could go light and dark on it, right?
Yeah.
So take medical research. It seems highly likely, in my mind, that in our lifetime, that a large language model trained with proprietary health data will cure cancer. I believe that will happen, or most cancers. I also believe that exact same technology used by some jackass sitting in a campus in Colorado might be able to create a pathogen as powerful as a coronavirus for a country that's not ready to be able to combat that. I don't mean to be dark, but talk to anybody who's building it. They would say those two outcomes are both very, very plausible, if not likely. And the purpose of a documentary or the purpose of journalism is just to say, you got to pay attention to this because it's probably going to require personal responsibility. It's certainly going to require governmental responsibility and regulation, and you have a government, going back to the beginning of this podcast, that's not recruiting the best and the brightest because everyone's dogging it, and now you suddenly need smart people to engineer regulations from a machine that might be smarter than us. I mean, I'm just a little kid from Oshkosh, but man, that sounds hard, right?
It does sound hard.
And Katie, here's another grab them by the lapels moment. You talk to the heads of these companies, as Jim and I do. We've spent a lot of time with the biggest companies. This is all coming faster than people think. That what people think is an 18-month time horizon is really a 6-month time horizon. And what's in the garage, what's under the sheet, is even more powerful than people realize. There's a lot that's been developed that has not been deployed.
It is urgent.
Yep.
To say the least.
For
And
sure.
I think you're so right. Are you worried that, though, we talked about media and journalists. First of all, two concerns of AI for me: job loss, and jobs are going to be lost.
Yep.
And B, disinformation, right? And using it for nefarious purposes. So, and deep fakes and all that stuff. I mean, how concerned are you about both of those things?
I'd say the latter much more. I think that, listen, the introduction for your average consumer to AI is going to be a bunch of really high-end manufactured BS, right? That's going to be a little bit by domestic actors, a lot by the Iranians, the Koreans, the Russians, and the Chinese who want to manipulate our system and want to pump this sludge into your Facebook feed, Instagram feed, and into TikTok. And this stuff's really good. It can make Katie Couric look and sound like Katie Couric, and
well,
you're not
it
going
made
to know.
Nancy Pelosi look intoxicated.
That's right.
And that was very rudimentary technology.
And the stuff that you've not seen yet is blow your mind good. And so it's going to be used, and it's going to be used for nefarious purposes, and that's going to require like a population that trusts the media to say that that's not true. Like, that's one. I might be naive. I don't worry as much about the job part of it. I worry about it certainly for certain groups of people. But I think the history of technology is that it causes a tremendous amount of anxiety. It causes a fair amount of disruption, but ultimately does lead to higher productivity and more jobs. It's painful getting there. But I think that at least for let's say the next 5 years, like right now, I think the technology is actually jankier than I would have thought at this point. But it will get better. And when it gets better, I would just look at it as, how do I use it to do my job more effectively?
Right.
At some point, it could displace things. It's something that's mechanical, something that's rote, something that's research-based.
Well, you talk about graphics. If you can just get AI graphics, do you need a graphic designer?
Right. Yeah, there's throughout the, and I don't mean to be cold about it, but I think throughout history, like there were jobs that were abundant and then they don't exist. And the question is, and this goes back to a functioning government, like if we were smarter, like in some ways we have a baby problem. We don't have enough people to do the jobs that we need to have done. They're just mismatched geographically and skill-wise. So if you could somehow figure out and get ahead of this to realize what are the sectors most likely to be hit, they know this. They know exactly which ones are going to be hit. How do you equip your vocational schools, your 2-year colleges, your 4-year colleges, training programs to be able to get, if I'm a trucker, like, I'm sorry, at some point you're not going to be trucking. There is going to be, it's going to be the easiest
not going to
thing
keep on
for an
trucking.
economy. Not going to keep on trucking, but it's the largest, I think it's the largest job, at least for men in the United States.
Yeah, it's spread everywhere.
And
Spread
do
everywhere.
you find that businesses, since you all have done extensive reporting on this, do you find that business or government is taking the steps to prepare for this revolution?
Oh, hell no. Hell no. Government, no. They can't. Like, they're just, it's not.
Well, they can't even.
They don't even. We don't know exactly what we're dealing yet with AI, so it's a little bit hard. I'm a little sympathetic, and it's a little hard to regulate. The government, what they would tell, if they were on truth serum, they'd say they don't really want to regulate it because they don't want the Chinese to race ahead of us on the most important technology. We have a year head start, and so they're not going to say it publicly, but that is what it, like if I'm Sam Altman and I'm Mark Zuckerberg and I'm trying to lobby for as much freedom to get this stuff to be able to grow, you just warn that China is going to eat our lunch. That's going to get lawmakers to back off. There's definitely some truth to that. So I don't think government has created a framework to think about this. And I think businesses are looking at it as a way to increase productivity and reduce costs. They're not necessarily looking at the societal consequences of it. And I don't think anyone other than the big companies just realize like how much bigger the big companies are going to get. Your Microsofts, your Amazons, your
Apple.
Googles, your Apples, because it requires so much compute power, so many chips, so much energy to build these things that only these nation-state companies that are literally the size of countries are going to have enough capital to be able to do it. So all fixable and probably solvable, but like it's complicated stuff.
And it makes you want to kind of put the sheets over your
Right,
head
so
and go
most
back
people are
to
like, I'll go
sleep.
have a
You're like,
beer and go
holy
fish.
shit, I
Yeah.
can't deal with this,
Yeah.
right? Well, speaking of a boy from Oshkosh, Bagash, we have to talk about your book, Jim. It's called Just the Good Stuff.
Yeah.
And I have to say, I really appreciate this book. It's no BS secrets to success, no matter what life throws at you. But I mean, this was a long time coming for you personally. Yep. I love how you basically write what a dipshit you were when you were growing up. I think those are your words. How remarkably unremarkable you were. I mean, you struggled in school. You had a shitty GPA.
Yep.
You didn't know what you were going to do with your life. Yep. And yet, somehow you got it together.
Right.
Talk about that, because I think that this is such an important and valuable lesson for all people. I mean, you found your passion, and as trite and graduation speechy as it sounds, you did find something that you could really channel your energies into. So talk about that.
Yeah, I think it does sound trite, but it is like I always tell college graduates, like, just try your hardest until you can no longer try to find something you would do for free that you just enjoy doing, that you are naturally gifted at.
So it doesn't feel like work. That's
so
what
it doesn't
I always
feel
say.
like work, and like I'm curious to begin with. I'm mischievous to begin with. I'm experimental to begin with. So like the once I found something that I liked, it suddenly made me feel like I was like capable and I was smart. And the book, the reason I opened with this, like, look at Jim the dipshit who's smoking Camels and drinking, and my mom hates the part where I say I'm stoned all the time, but mom's going to have to deal with that. But like the reason I do that is I hope that the book works for people who are already in power, but I hope there's a lot of people out there who are sitting in situations like I was. It didn't come from privilege, sitting in a small town, didn't go to some glorious campus, who just realizes that, like, despite what you see around you, it's an amazing country. That, like, if you find a passion and you can easily move and you go, like, throw yourself into it and you do the right thing, work hard, like, try to be the first person in the office, do anything you can possibly do, don't cut corners, don't dog other people, like rise on the power of, like, your own achievement and your own effort, that really good things can happen. And we all know, like, thousands of stories like this from friends and family and people we've met over the years. And so I hope that part resonates. And then the reason we wrote the book, and I say we because, like, so much of this is me distilling Mike and Roy and other people that we know, is that I am in the rare position where we've started two companies and I've had to learn to be a CEO in the digital era and deal with 65% of my staff being under the age of 40 or 35. So I've learned a lot about what does it take to lead when you're trying to merge our generation with a younger generation, often by screwing it up. I make fun of myself a ton in there to set up these chapters, but it's more hopefully, like, the reason each chapter ends with these action-oriented items is hopefully 5, 10, 15, 20 of the chapters you find so interesting that you're going back to it when you're dealing with how do I deal with a bad boss, or how do I think about
fire someone? You know,
how do I fire someone? Which is like no one taught me how to fire someone.
And you did a terrible job early on, and you've learned that you can fire somebody with grace, and as you said, keep it classy.
Yes, but you're not born with that. Certainly, I wasn't born with that. All of a sudden, I was like we'd start a company, I'm running things, and I have to fire this guy, and the poor guy comes in, and all I do is list the 10 reasons that he's not good at his job. I had never given him pre-warning. I had never given him a chance to correct. I did everything wrong, but I didn't know what right was. And so hopefully in the book, people will see, oh, here's how you can do that in a difficult situation.
And Katie, here's what's magical about the book is that it's not aspirational, that it's actually
so practical.
Jim's journey. Yes. So he kept a literal iPhone diary in his notes app while he was living all of this. And this is the book. And, like, I've lived it now for 20 plus years with him, and he's made a real difference to me, that I'm 20 pounds less because of the fitness ideas that we have in here. There too, like, he started as having a Big Mac belly, and since then, every year since then has been fitter than the year before. A very simple metric that anyone can achieve.
Well, that's reason enough to buy this damn book.
But I don't say, it's hard. I say in the opening, I said, like, in some ways to write a, like, book that's about giving people life advice. I hated the idea because it just feels like you're a jackass. Like, look at, I figured it out. And I try to set up no, like, if I could figure it out, you could surely figure it out. And one of the big themes is And it took me a long time to really realize it's just how much we control. We have this natural default to blame our bosses, blame our parents, blame our upbringing, blame our college, blame our teachers, as opposed to, nope, every day I get up and I get to decide, like, what am I going to put in my body? Am I going to work out? Am I going to be kind to my wife? Am I going to find special time alone, away from a phone with my children? Am I going to deal with a complex work situation where I'm proud of the way that I handle it versus not? Like, you control a lot, and I'm probably a little nutty in the area in terms of putting more thought into each and every one of those dimensions, but I think most people make the mistake of not putting nearly enough. They just kind of bob along. Like,
Yeah.
oh, this happened.
And Annie Dillard says how we spend our days is how we spend our lives. And I
Right.
think people don't realize that, to your point, every day you make decisions and that it all is compiled to make up your life,
For sure.
for better or for worse. And one of the things I also love about the book, I think because Mike has always been so special to me, is, I feel like you all are, you live, you have values-based professional lives and values-based personal lives. In
Yeah.
other words, I think there are certain things that you all are that you, God, let me start that again. I love Mike, and I like the way you talk about Mike being this eternal optimist, how his glass isn't just half full, it's like overflowing,
Right.
and you're more of a realist and a
Yeah.
little more of a cynic. But what I think aligns you all and makes this partnership so powerful, and I think it emanates into your whole company, is the values you espouse
Yeah.
in your professional lives, but also in your personal lives. Can you talk about that? Because, I think that's really missing from the world in many ways.
I think you nailed it. Like, I'm so worried about the people in positions of power these days on whether they've thought about that values. And all of us can sit there and think, like, what do you believe in? How do you want to be seen, and how do you want your children to see
It's
you?
like
Right?
it's like when David Brooks talks about eulogy values,
Yes.
right?
But it's that, like, you want, like what, and anyone can sit down and say, like, what are your non-negotiables? Like, I'm going to be honest even when it hurts. I am going to be transparent even when it might not be in my best self-interest. I am always going to, like, push myself and others to be high achieving, but never at the expense of being a bad person. And here's the thing, and you've lived it in TV for sure, and now you're seeing it as an entrepreneur. It is insane how contagious we are. Insane. If you are sitting in a position of power, whether you're a CEO or whether you're a manager or whether you're a little league coach, the way you carry yourself is instantly contagious. If you are a good person who works hard, who gives people grace, who shows some empathy, it almost within weeks, you'll see it everywhere around you. The opposite is true. If you're a jackass, if you're a truth dodger, if you are a mischief maker, you're
Well,
a cancer.
You're a mischief maker. You can be,
But in a
little
bad
bit-
way. But
no,
like,
yes.
I don't.
Oh, I see. Creating drama.
Creating drama.
Yeah.
Like, if you're that, your whole company, your whole team, your whole little league team, it's going to be full of drama. It's going to be full of dishonorable
And distracted
actions.
from the job, the mission.
And it's
Yeah.
crazy. And I think that I hate it when I see church leaders or when I see political leaders or I see business leaders not carrying, like, this. It's like a blessing that we have, right? And not just to be able to, that people will listen to what we write or to what we say, but that people work for us and count on us, and that people don't carry that and say you have, like, this obligation to humanity inside. Not to be cheesy, but you have an obligation to humanity to do the best you can with that, and to make people feel better and to make them do better things. And sometimes when I talk about this, oh, you soft, man, you're woke or whatever, like, bullshit. Like, there's nothing soft about me, and there's nothing woke about me. But there is I think you can be really high achieving, and you can have really awesome results and still be a good person, surround yourself with good people, and then watch the echo effect of that. I think those are very doable, and I think a lot of what's in the book is helping managers figure out how do you put those pieces together.
Because you're right. I think people aren't really taught how to be leaders. They find themselves in these positions, and I think there are some, milestones and some kind of blueprint. everybody has a different personality, but I think this is incredibly helpful, not only to people in positions of power, air quotes here. I don't know why, because there shouldn't be air quotes, but people who are working for them, who, you want them to do well. You want them to rise to the occasion, and then sometimes even rise out of your company,
well,
right?
Think about a 22-year-old right now. So think about you when you were 22 versus a 22-year-old now. I don't know about your upbringing, but I went to church. I was in the Boy Scouts. I went to schools where I had small enough class sizes where I had teachers who were intimately involved. I played Little League sports where coaches knew who I was. And I had parents and grandparents. So look at all of that moral structure that was around me. Now look at your kid who's 22.
And despite all that, you were still getting high all the time.
Yeah, I was a screw up despite having everything built for me. But look at some of these kids coming through. They didn't have Boy Scouts or Girl Scouts. They're not going to church. They might be in classes that are too big for a teacher to pay attention to them, and they're staring at their phone all day, looking at people who they think have a more entertaining life and are cuter or more handsome than them,
or richer, or whatever.
They're dying for leadership. Dying. They need it. We fundamentally thirst for morality and leadership. I really do believe that. And I think the only place that's going to provide it are the people like us who are in positions to make it affect in very little ways. I have 500 people here. We have 150 people maybe at HQ. But you've got, you said 50 people, right?
40
some people.
Yeah.
That's a big difference. Those 40 are then going to make a difference on a bunch of people in their own lives.
What have you learned from Jim, and what do you think you've taught him?
Yeah, so one of the great things about this book is it also is aimed at rising stars. So you mentioned the bad boss, and in here, Jim talks about what to do about a bad boss, and taking feedback, giving feedback, taking feedback. Something that I discovered is that a lot of times the way that you react to, this could be in a relationship or in a working place, the way that you react to what someone tells you often vindicates what they said. Mike, you're a little defensive. What do you mean? Just yesterday I was like, we often do that. And if we can catch ourselves, we're going to have a better relationship. We're going to be better in the workplace. The biggest thing I've learned from Jim was that, me, I've always been a story hound, a news hound, always thinking about
never sleeping. I used to worry about Mike.
We all did.
Now you don't have to worry, because now I have my Aura ring, which gives me a gummy crown when I get my good night's sleep. But I'm glad you said that, because it's very related. The biggest thing that I've learned from Jim is opening the aperture of life, working more muscles in life, thinking beyond just what is the next story, and making sure that he has a great way that he expresses it. He talks about his happiness matrix, and having a bucket for family, for fitness, for faith, for community service, for hobbies, for travel. And the magic is, and the great insight is, that those buckets don't automatically fill themselves, that if we're not intentional about investing in those buckets, it becomes work and then whatever's left. And that's the mistake that so many young people make, and that I made, is that the default was everything being work and fitness, hobby, sleep, health, all that just squeezed in at the end. And so you mentioned sleep. We do a great newsletter every evening, Finish Line. We've got more response to it than any newsletter we've ever gotten, and it's all life, leadership, health, wellness, fitness. And
I wanted to do one of those and call it Nightcap.
There you go.
Yeah, but go on.
I like that.
You might have some competition, but go ahead.
Bring it on. The biggest, one of the great learnings is sleep longer, live longer. And I think that's not intuitive to people in our
people
jobs.
used to brag about how little sleep they needed.
Right.
It was kind of a badge of honor. I remember
sure.
Brian Gumbel saying, I'd get by on 4 hours of sleep. Meanwhile, I'm like, how can you do that? It would ruin me for the rest of my life.
I need to do that twice every night.
Yeah, exactly. And then some. Yeah.
And so including sleep, both watching Jim, talking with Jim, his correction, I've seen that looking beyond like what we're typing, like what's literally on your screen, like in the end, that's more of a service to your audience and to your colleagues and to your company. Like if you're able to come like strong, rested, wise, not rattled, like you're going to do a better job.
And this is one of the reasons, like in terms of your question, like what did I learn from him is, like I hate these like entrepreneurs, CEOs, these stories of like, oh, these like superhuman people who on their own are changing the world. I'm like, all we are is a collection of the totality of our experiences and other people. Like take away my parents, my wife, my kids, and Mike, and like I'm nothing. Like there's no way that I would have had success. And with Mike, the thing that you put your finger on, which is like just like his, like what people don't realize, he might be the most famous person you know who's also the most humble person you know, right? And like in so much graciousness and so much humility, and those things don't come as naturally to me as they do to Mike, and like, but it's rubbed off a ton.
But you know what I love, Jim, is that you admit in this book, I was a schmuck, or I was a jerk about this, or I'm more cynical than Mike. I think it's very transparent, and by the way, I think that may be one of the most important words in this book is radical transparency, and that you've learned that, and that isn't intuitive either, because I think that was not the business mindset for us growing up when we looked at corporations.
Right.
This kind of being an honest broker for all your employees.
Yeah, and like if you think about it, if you're truly transparent, which is another one of those like buzzy words, but if you're truly transparent,
it's like authenticity,
it means
right?
but it means you've gotten to the point in life where you're comfortable in your skin. Like I know there's gonna be some people who like me, don't like me. Some people are gonna like the book, some people hate the book. Like I'm comfortable with that, right? I'm comfortable knowing.
Can you
like,
help me get to that point, please?
It's hard, but it's a daily struggle, right? But it is like the more you can just be yourself and express yourself. Like I would like to think if you talk to the people here, the reason we don't have a ton of drama and we do have pretty high productivity is I don't think they ever think we're full of shit. Like we'll answer everything. If we screw something up, I'll say, man, I screwed that one up. Or if we get something right, I'll say, we're killing it here. And they're not going like, I don't know, is he real? Is he not real? Like that doesn't mean they all like me. I'm sure there's a ton of things people dislike about me, but I don't think there's never a wonderment about like, are we being straight?
And nobody
people.
thinks you're a bullshitter, which is great.
Right.
No
one wants that.
People respect you for that.
Wait,
go ahead.
Sorry, Casey. One quick thing on humility, and that is that as you have success personally or professionally, as the people around this table have, like I feel like one of the things that helps with humility is you realize a certain percentage of it was luck for sure, and all the people who made it possible, the people who gave you a break, the person, for me, Gail Shea Nardi at the Richmond Times-Dispatch, and Shenandoah County Bureau in Stanton, Virginia, who like spent hours with me on the phone when I was a Washington Lee student, like talking through my stories, helping me write a story for the big boy paper. And the lessons like from Gail, like use this today when I write Axios AM. And there's so many people like that. And we all are beneficiaries of right place, right time. And
definitely.
We had the wisdom and the grit to use our gifts. But paying attention to that makes it much easier to pay attention to, okay, here's what I have. How can I serve the audience, the colleagues, the people coming along to take our jobs?
And, I thought it was interesting. You have a recommendation from Mr. Rogers, Fred Rogers, the kindest person, I think, in the history of the world, where you take a minute and you think about the people who helped you along the way. There are I love a lot of the sort of inherent wisdom in so much of this book, Jim, and I'm excited to try to live my life a little more with more humanity and more thought and more intentions.
And not giving a shit what people think.
Well, I think women in particular are people pleasers, and I find it crushing when people, not so much when they criticize me if it's a legitimate thing that I believe in, but when they misrepresent me and misunderstand something I'm saying, that's when it really bugs me. But the book is, I'm almost done. The book is divided up into 3 sections: life work, work stuff, and boss stuff. And as I said, it offers a lot of nuggets of wisdom. Your life is a story, a long, winding, wildly unpredictable narrative, so write it literally. I think that's what you mean, right, Jim, for like thinking about what you're going to do every day, or is that something different?
For sure. No, it is, again, it goes to like understanding how much you control. Like on the one end, you can say, God, it sounds self-indulgent. You're worried about your own narrative. I want to gut check myself constantly. Like I want to be a great husband. I'm married 23 years. I'm not always a great husband. I've gotten much better at it. I want to be a great father who has like a really unique relationship with each one of my kids. The most touching thing that I can say is like in the last month I've gotten a text from each one of my 3 kids calling me their best friend. Like I love that. Like that. But
That
I
makes me
think
cry.
about that. I think about that all the time about like how do I want people at work? I want people to say high character, high energy, whatever. But that character is at the base of it. And I think everyone should do that. Like, just how do you want? What do you want to be? Like, I don't understand how you don't do that now that I've kind of started doing it because, like, at best we're around 70, 80 years, right? And we have like 65 that are 70 that are like awesome, and then it gets harder. Like why not maximize that? Maximize like your own performance, your own happiness, the effect that you have on other people, and kind of not the legacy you leave, but just like the contagiousness of your own behavior. And I think if you do those things, like good things will happen. And going back to your mystery, I became obsessed with Fred Rogers, and it's the reason I wrote a column on Fred and Mike. It because there is so many parallels between the two of them in terms of, but it is this like crazy success but crazy humility. And like I've started in the last year like writing down, I have my own list of like who are the people that have made a difference in my life, and now it's like 100 long, and every week or two I'll try to just read it just to ground you to remember like we're all like I can be as arrogant as the next person, I can have hubris like anyone else, like just like grounding yourself in that. And not everyone should do everything in there. The idea is like just come up with your own little matrix of like what are the things that you do that are much more purposeful so that you're bringing in like more health and more success and more just like feeling satisfied and feeling like you're living the kind of life you would want, to live.
One other dimension of the book, Katie, that comes naturally to Jim and doesn't come naturally to me at all is hard stuff. And I've gotten much better at that, learning from Jim, but you gravitate toward hard stuff.
I mean, you probably experienced with a startup, like at some point, like I used to be so emotional, right? So I would like at Politico, something good's happening and I'm wah, and something bad's happening and I'm like wah, and I had to learn that like, oh shit, I'm gonna die if I live this way. And so I had to learn to like, okay, I'm just gonna like, bad things are gonna happen, good things are gonna happen. My job is to keep a clear mind. And over time, I've kind of learned to like the hard stuff. Like I'm really good at having the most uncomfortable, difficult conversations with people because I've learned to do it. Like I'll write it down. I'll be very fair with them. I'll be very transparent and honest with them. I'll give them kind of a remedy to the problem. But I don't have a hard time having those conversations or dealing with the hard stuff of business. And it's a lot of that's like mindset. A lot of it's just like we've had 2 startups and crazy media, and we deal with so much bad stuff that maybe it beat the caring out of me. So I'm able to look at it more clinically. But yeah, I think people. That's why I write a lot about firing. Like I hate how companies treat people. I think it is so bad when someone loses their job and they didn't see it coming. Whereas it's not that I like firing people, but I think you'd be hard-pressed to find more than 1 or 2 people who dislike me, even if I personally fired them. Because what I would like them to say is like, oh, Jim wrote me this very thoughtful note on what's wrong. He did not sugarcoat it. It was hard to read. He then followed up with a conversation. He showed me how to correct it. When he decided it wasn't corrected, he brought me in and he thanked me for everything he did, but said, you're not going to work here. Like, if you can do that, at least you've given that, you've thrown as much humanity into a difficult situation as you possibly could. And most people don't. Why? Because they hate hard conversations. They hate it. It makes them feel so uncomfortable.
And
well,
so
that's self-indulgent.
And so many leaders are so awful at hard conversations.
Awful at it. Awful. Almost everybody.
The other thing, I'm just going to do a couple little nuggets, and then I'm going to let you guys get back to running your company. Almost every great thing in life starts with serendipity. Mike, you kind of suggested it. Usually someone or something new entering your life by chance.
Yeah.
Basically, as you were saying, not only recognizing that, but something you mentioned about luck. You have to sort of recognize and capitalize on those lucky encounters and situations, right? So it's part luck, but also part knowing what the luck can lead to, right?
100%. And a specific dimension of that is having the self-awareness or having people in your life to help you see what your gift is. Like when I talk to students, I always tell them there's kind of a 3-4 step process. Like the first one is have a gift. That's not up to you. But the second one is like recognize it and hone it. And think of how many of your social friends, classmates, very far along in life realized what their gift was. Sometimes even after like their working life, right? Like so many people don't. And then third, what Jim talked about is nirvana is having somebody who will pay you to exploit your gift, right? Pay you to do
What
what
you
you're
love
good
to
at.
do.
And then the secret where I'm at is pass it along. And who can you help awaken that gift in?
Be a quitter. That threw me. Be a quitter.
I
Because
think
we're
people
taught,
are-
we're taught,
Yeah,
don't give up, don't quit, never, never, never give in. Wasn't that Winston Churchill?
Yeah, but sometimes you have to quit. Like the example I use is I was on the Pulitzer board for prizes. It's like one of the most esteemed things you could do in journalism. It was supposed to be a 9-year commitment. I was 3 years in, and I realized I'm trying to run a company and read 15 books and judge all these categories. Like, it's not healthy for my relationship with my kids or my time, and I quit. And like usually, and no, I don't think anyone had ever quit the board. Like you just didn't do it. And I think they looked at me like I was an alien. But I was like, I'm just like someone else can give more time to this. And I think quitting bad relationships, that's the big one. Like how many times did we think we could change somebody, or did we think somebody would change, or I don't know, it's not that bad. Like you can quit it. Like that is if there's one thing we've really nailed at Axios is like we have gotten rid of people who are just not good people, even when they're super talented. And we made a corporate choice to do that, but you make an individual choice, right? We always justify it. And it's like the minute you get rid of it, you can just feel it lift. Like these people who suck your soul and your energy, these leeches, like, duh, you got to get them out of your life.
And you have to do it fast, right?
Rip it off.
It's always hire slow, fire fast, right?
The power of now. And that is one of our like true learnings in business is the second, and this is true in your personal life and your professional life, the second you realize you should do something, move on it.
And you also say trust your gut, you know, which I think is really important too, because I think people hear a little voice in their head and they're like, oh, no,
Right.
that's not right. But more often than not, you say it's important because what your gut is telling you is actually right.
I would say particularly the older you get, right? Like I think we underestimate the power of our intuition. We almost always know the right thing to do. We don't always act on it. If you just act on it, you can clean up the 10% you get wrong. Otherwise, you think yourself into a pretzel.
I think we've covered a couple of the other ones. Persistently pursue work so personally satisfying that you would do it for free. I think we covered that.
Yeah.
The importance of candor. I think we covered that. But the final piece of wisdom, when shit happens, shine.
I think, which is like, that's an original. That is our phraseology. The idea is like, that you can do this, like that bad things are going to happen. It is so easy for me to be good or nice or kind or gracious when everything is awesome. It's really hard when shit hits the fan and like someone does something wrong or there's an awful situation. And that is the moment where you have to really think, okay, how do I handle this complicated situation in a way that like my kids would be proud if they were watching it, and that my employees, even if they don't like what we're going through, will say, man, that was handled well. And when we have these really bad situations, I almost think of myself as having this out-of-body experience and watching me. Like, how are you handling yourself? Because everyone's going to feed off of it. It goes to the contagious nature of leadership. Like people, if I'm fidgety and I'm angry, they're going to be fidgety and angry. Whereas if I say, listen, this is bad. Here's what's happening. Here's how we're thinking about it. Once you have a decision, here is exactly what we're going to do and why we're doing it. And here's why I know you're not going to like it, but this is why I'm doing it and why I'm addressing the thing you don't like about it. And then, I think if you do these things, you get a lot better at it. It's like riding a bike. Like you just have to do these things over and over, and then they go from, oh, I'm thinking about it, to it's just part of your fabric.
There's another thing about shit and nibbling. What was that
That
again?
was stole. That
was not original.
And I credit him as Ben Horowitz in the Hard Things About Hard Things, and he had this thing. line that I stuck with me, which was like, when you got to eat shit, don't nibble. Which his point was, like,
That is a very gross.
It's a very gross, but
expression.
when you think about the
good
context,
advice.
it's perfect, because the whole idea is that when you know that you have to fire someone, or you know you got to shut down a business, or you know you've got to get out, that we have this tendency to just delay. And his thing is like, just eat it, like, and get out, because you're going to do it eventually, and the quicker you get to fixing, and the better it is.
Well, I mean, again, I could stay here for hours. I love talking to
is so
both
fun.
of you. The book is just the good stuff. No BS secrets to success, no matter what life throws at you. You know, we're having a retreat with our, oh, thank you. Thanks, Mike. We're having a retreat with our company later this week, and I am going to support the author, and I am going to buy 40 copies of this
God
for our
bless you.
employees. And I think, I'm going to also make them listen to this podcast,
Oh.
whether they like it or not.
There will be a
They
quiz.
better do that anyways.
Yeah.
But, we love it.
But anyway, thank you guys so much.
Well, you've
This
been
was
great.
really fun. Love
You've been
talking
great.
to
Thank you for being a very, very, very early encourager, supporter.
Yes, by the way,
Always
I
fun.
do deserve a little credit. I wasn't going to bring this up in Mike's origin story with
No,
Politico.
100%.
I mean,
Like,
do you want to share that, Mike?
Katie Couric has always had great ideas, and one of her great ideas, the origin of Axios AM, the newsletter that I appreciate your reading every morning. It started as an email that I wrote to my two bosses at Politico, and it said in the subject line, "How we can rock today," and then
I started. So I was anchoring the CBS Evening News, and Mike started sending me this email. And I was like, oh, my God, this is so helpful. You remember how they used to have the AP playbook when,
Yep.
back in the dark ages? Yep. I was like, this is so great, so helpful. It sets the scene for the day. And you should make this available to so many people. They would pay for this. Come on.
There we
Love it.
go. Now look at us.
Yes. So I feel a
I
little
love
bit pride of ownership with Mike's. Not really,
You've been
but
great to us over the years.
I do think, I was right.
when
And
Katie Couric has an idea, listen. That's
well, I have
the
a
next
lot. I have
chapter
a lot
for
of
the
shitty
sequel.
ones too. And when she has a bad idea, tell her.
And I will bring candor, but grace, and at the same time, we will always be respectful.
Yeah. Well,
And she won't care what we think.
No. Well, yes, I will. I'm working on that. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you,
This was
Katie.
awesome. It was a treat. Appreciate it.